Kingdom. On the one hand, why should taxpayers fork out for somebody that's left the country and the institution? He is no longer a working, serving royal. But I don't think it matters. He is one of the most famous men in the world, and whether he's a royal or not, he is an ambassador for this country. And he still does good. Charitable causes, the Invictus Games, and he is still a nice and charming guy with a heart. And whilst he has left the royal family and departed these shores, he was and remains the son of King Charles. That is a biological fact. Well, let's hope so. And it wasn't his choice to be born into royalty. It wasn't his choice to be the son of the king. And for that reason, I think he should have equal police protection to his brother William when he is in this country. He couldn't be a more high-profile figure, and unfortunately, like all the royals, Harry will be a target for some very bad people. I fear that if, God forbid, anything happened to him or his family, the authorities would have blood on their hands. So, it's not often that I back Prince Harry, but on this one, he has my support. Look what happened to his poor mum, killed in a Paris tunnel in the 1990s with an allegedly drunk chauffeur. A top royal security insider recently told me that Diana would still be with us today if she had had top royal protection at that time. So let's not make the same mistake twice. Prince Harry needs full protection and the best we've got. Yes, he might be a numpty, but he's our numpty.
Good morning. Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been another terrible week for the government, with a race row plaguing the Tories. Should they hand back the money donated to them by Frank Hester? Meanwhile, there are calls for Diane Abbott to have the Labour whip restored, but should she be allowed back into the party? Former Tory leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith will be here in the studio discussing the future of the West, Britain and, of course, the Conservatives. I'll be speaking to Transport Secretary Mark Harper about the government's plans for net zero electric vehicles and suggestions that Penny Mordaunt should be leading the Tories rather than Rishi Sunak. I'll also be joined by the Shadow Paymaster General, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth. And stop the press! We actually have a Liberal Democrat on the show this morning. The party's chief whip, Wendy Chamberlain, will join us from their spring conference. And author and commentator Rob Henderson will join me to chat about his new book, Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family and social class. Don't go anywhere, because we've got 90 minutes of fun-packed politics coming right up. Well, to go through the papers this morning, I'm delighted to be joined by Australia's former High Commissioner to the UK, the former Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, who's now chair of the Policy Exchange think tank. Nice to see you this morning, Alexander. Thanks for joining me. I know we've been talking in the green room about these mad stories now about Penny Mordaunt being the answer to Tory prayers. Let's talk about the polling that appears in the Mail on Sunday, first of all, basically predicting electoral oblivion, wipeout, whatever word you want, an Armageddon for the Tories. Do you agree with that analysis, that Labour could be winning or on course to win a 250-seat or plus majority?
Yes, I must say, as I go around the country, that is the impression I get. But people aren't very enthusiastic about Labour, but they really want to punish the Tories.
Yes.
And these stories that we're reading about today, Tory MPs briefing the media about how they'd like to change the leader yet again, they're just suicide. Changing the leader in the first place, I can tell you from Australian experience,
yes,
is very damaging to a political party in government. Changing the leader twice, three times, changing yet again, it will be oblivion for the Conservative
But then
Party.
You're a really experienced politician, and you must have some sympathy with the crisis that the Tories find themselves in. They're looking at Rishi Sunak. He isn't moving the dial at all. We had the budget, which, I mean, I don't know, what was your reaction to the budget?
Well, there wasn't enough in it to interest or inspire the public. What the government has to do is develop much more of an overall agenda. So, first of all, inspire people to think positively about the country in the future. That sounds just like rhetoric, but you need some of that rhetoric. That's what, by the way, Boris Johnson and Ronald Reagan and people like that were really good at.
Yeah.
making people feel good about the greatness of their country, but secondly, having policies that look as though they're going to achieve that. So, you know, continuing with the if you like, Blairite agenda rather than differentiating their product, aiming at net zero by 2050, spending billions and billions on renewable energy initiatives, forcing people into electric cars and so on, pushing up the price of energy. In the end, they're doing what Labor were doing. So you
don't agree with the theory that it's a good idea to shoot some of Labour's foxes, for instance, by scrapping non-doms?
No, I don't. And I think shooting Labour's foxes, as the expression goes, is a really bad idea because it looks as though Labour's already in government.
Yes.
I mean, the government is adopting the Labor Party's policies. I wouldn't do that.
Also,
I would fight the Labor Party's policies.
No, that's right.
Not embrace them.
And doesn't the electorate then become inspired or encouraged to sort of think to themselves, well, why not Sir Keir Starmer? How much worse can it be?
Well, exactly. The electorate will just think, well, it doesn't matter who you vote for, which is what they do think at the moment. They don't particularly fear Labor because Labor doesn't have an awful lot of policies to fear, and they're tired of the Tories, all this gossip about changing leaders. They have changed leaders all over the place on policies.
I know you were a close observer of the coronation, and therefore you will have seen Penny Mordaunt's starring role.
She did a marvellous job holding the sword.
Does that make her a potential Prime Minister in your mind, Alexandra? I mean, she's the person that is being touted seemingly by the right. Now, there's an interesting story in the Sunday Telegraph about this, because the right are now galvanising around Penny Mordaunt, which is not a sentence I thought I would utter about 6 months ago. But then there's a suggestion in the Sunday Telegraph that actually they're only doing that and making her a stalking horse to try and draw the centre into calling for Rishi Sunak to go. So the right are wanting the people that supported Rishi, who were ready for Rishi, to now dump him.
Yeah, so I think this will lead to a kind of 1993 Canadian election result where the Canadian Tories ended up with just 2 seats.
Seriously?
I think it would be utterly catastrophic for the Conservative Party yet again to change its leader.
But then you're talking about a near extinction event. If you're saying that the Tories might be down to 2 seats.
Well, the Canadian Tories were down to 2 seats. They might have 100 or 90 seats, but that's near extinction. And a lot of their traditional voters will just ship to Reform.
Yes.
I mean, I'd have to say MPs should spend their time thinking about policies that might inspire the public and give advice to the Prime Minister and rally behind the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, not brief the media about how they're about yet again to dump the leader. This is absolutely suicidal.
I agree with the suicidal nature of it because it seems completely self-defeating. However, you'll have quite a lot of MPs saying we're trying to communicate with Downing Street and we can't get through. You've got Rishi Sunak sort of beavering away behind the scenes. He's not a good campaigner. He's very much keener on sort of the planning, the spreadsheets, the working out, you know, the tinkering behind. He's not a Boris Johnson figure, is he? And that's what the party's crying out for.
Well, they got rid of Boris Johnson, so they're not going to have another Boris Johnson figure. And Boris Johnson was a huge electoral winner.
Yeah. Do you think it was a mistake to get rid of him?
Well, of course it was a mistake because they should have. I mean, Boris, made a lot of mistakes, but they should have rallied behind him in the interests of the survival of the party. But they didn't choose to do that. They got rid of him. It doesn't matter. They've got rid of him. They don't have another person like Boris to put in his place. They have Rishi, who's in the job. Their job is to rally behind him and to help him. Well, I don't know about their communications, but they need to communicate with him.
Unite or die, as Isaac Levido has been telling the party.
Unite or die, yeah.
How about the Farage factor, though? I note that he's back on the front page of the Sunday Express, hinting at the idea of a comeback. Obviously, he's working for this TV station. There's a suggestion that if he does come back, he's going to dive bomb into the electoral campaign really at the last minute. But can he do serious damage to the Conservatives, do you think?
Sure. I mean, I think he can, and he probably is already, because he, in the Reform, has the potential to mop up a lot of those red wall Tory voters, and losing those voters, where are the Conservatives going to get their votes from? So it's potentially, with the first past the post electoral system, a major problem for the Conservatives. They managed to diminish the UKIP vote in 2015 and more recently in 2019 on the Brexit issue.
Yes.
But they don't have that card to play anymore for obvious reasons. So how they will diminish the reform vote, it's hard to see.
It's hard to tell.
They will do it with policies, but they have to come up with strong and very clear policies, not marginal policies. Is
their defence policy strong enough? The other big story of the weekend is this idea of us being in a proxy war, effectively, with Russia. We know about the GPS system on Grant Shapps' jet being blocked. Now we've got a story that he had to cancel a visit to Odessa because of the threat from a Russian missile. And meanwhile, on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, we've got a Latvian defence chief calling for conscription in the UK to try and see off the threat from Vladimir Putin. Your reaction to those stories?
Well, I don't think there's any need for conscription. I think that's way over the top. But you need to invest in defence technology rather than having tens of thousands of extra soldiers who are reluctant to be part of the army. Yeah, I mean, I do think the British government has done much better on defence than most European governments.
Yes.
So I think we should give credit where it's due.
Although, is that a low bar of comparison?
It is a low... No, it's true. It is a low bar. And still too much of the burden rests with the Americans, so the British government could do more, but they have done much better than most European, other than the East Europeans, the Poles and so on, but they have done much better than most Europeans, and they deserve quite a lot of credit for that. They've done a fantastic job on Ukraine. They have been really robust, simple, clear position in support of Ukraine. They've been very good on
Although
that.
Briefly, Alexander, no increase in defence spending in the budget.
No, well...
an error, do you think?
They have to get the money from somewhere. They spend so much money on green initiatives.
Yes.
That leaves them with so little else to spend on anything else.
Maybe there are more votes in the NHS than there are in defence spending.
Well, I mean, yes, but if you're always thinking about the votes and not the quality of government and the broad direction of the country, you're not going to get anywhere.
No, that's right.
And the NHS, they've had 14 years to improve the performance of the NHS, and all they've done is pump money into it. That is not going to be the ultimate solution.
Alexander Downer, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
It's a pleasure, Camilla.
Well, coming up next, we're going to be speaking to Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. I'd like to get his reaction to Rishi Sunak's leadership and also this idea of Penny Mordaunt giving the Tories a better chance of winning the next general election. Don't go anywhere.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
Get this right, we all know by now, don't we, that so many NHS workers are abused by people that they're trying to help. We'll all agree that that is pretty damn disgraceful, but what do we do about it? Because now some London hospitals are looking at whether or not they should be able to ban people that do this for a year from those hospital facilities. Is that the way forward? Daniel, do you like this? No abuse, no excuse, that is the campaign?
There's no other choice for most people. It's either the NHS or nothing. And if you're going to take that monopolistic power, then you need, I think, you have responsibilities towards people. You can't cut them off. So there are ways in which, of course, you can bring criminal charges against them. If they committed a criminal offence, that's fine. They might even be locked up in jail. But what you can't do is cut off health services because you're the only supplier.
Well, yes, I think you can cut it off and you should cut it off. London is very different from everywhere else, and it goes back to a conversation about immigration. The majority of nurses in London are either African or Filipino, and it harks back to their nature and their culture. When you're younger, your parents look after you. When you're older, you look after them. They don't go into homes. So there's a way that a threshold of tolerance they have that is above and beyond most people. So, because I found like when I was younger, most of the nurses were white. Now they work in hospitals in Ascot and Somerset. London is the war zone. I have seen horrific things happen to nurses, and they stay. They show up for work. There's a protection they are owed, beyond owed. And if you abuse something that's offered to you as a part of your citizenship, there should be a penalty for that. For the same reason,
you're obliged to use it. There's no offer involved in the NHS.
But there is an offer, because at the end of the day, like you figure out how to get money and go private. So just because you've created something that gives you... No, it's easy. If it's easy...
That's an impossible solution.
They've created something that's kind and easy and beneficial to all, indeed. But it's a good thing for all. Do not abuse it. That simple.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's lovely to have your company this Sunday morning. If I'm a bit croaky, by the way, I have spent the whole week off, ill in bed. I've got the lurgy that I think half the country has got. So if I have a little coughing fit, you'll hopefully forgive me. Now, I'm delighted to say that I'm joined now by former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, the MP for Chingford and Woodford Green. Lovely to see you this morning.
Thank you, Camilla.
Now, the newspapers bring us news of Tory calamity, Sir Ian, with the Tories apparently heading for the biggest defeat in history. Talk of Labour winning 250 seats, majority. It looks like it could be worse than 1997. What's your response to some of these reports?
Well, let me deal with the Labour bit first and I'll come back to the other stuff. I actually don't agree. The truth is, if you look at the polls as well, they tell you nearly half the public have simply not made an absolute decision about where they'll vote. Now, that's really important because the comparisons with 96 are wrong. I was here in 96 by way past longer than this moment in political cycle.
Yeah.
I would knock on doors of Tory voters and they would tell me, no good, sorry, I want change, I'm voting for Blair. They didn't say the Labour Party, they said Blair. He had cut through completely the decisions that had been made. At this stage, they haven't. So I always refer to this as the polling being a mile wide, but about an inch deep. The truth is, it's a reaction to us. It's not that they want Labour, it's they're fed up with us, the infighting and all the other problems. We've had COVID and the cost of living crisis. Any government that had faced the biggest challenge is bound to look like being unpopular because people are fed up with having cost of living, etc. And that's true. Sorting that out is absolutely vital. And then at the same time, nobody quite knows who Labour are. So you need to have a few battles with Labour, defining them and defining yourselves.
I know,
and we
but
seem to be
Rishi
dodging
Sunak
that.
seems to be, reluctant to take the fight to Labour. I mean, there's lots of key battlegrounds. You could talk about the private school VAT decision. You could talk about the Green Prosperity Pledge. But the attack lines are there, but they don't seem to attack for long enough and sort of directly enough at the stuff that Labour's coming up with and indeed the stuff that Labour's flip-flopping about. I mean, do you think Rishi Sunak's running scared of Labour? They come out with a budget that's Labour-light. As Alexander Downer just said to me, what's the point of imitating the opposition?
Well, I agree. So here's what they should do. There are 3 or 4 issues that are very critical to defining us and defining Labour. One of those is net zero. I have to tell you, I know none of my constituents I knock on doors that tell me they love the idea of spending vast sums of money and taxing them to get the money off them.
Yes.
So we saw that in Uxbridge, the ULEZ vote, but also the Uxbridge resistance to Labour there was the first time the 2019 coalition that elected us came back together again over this issue. You see the polls tell them that, yes, everyone wants a clean environment, of course we do, but we are less than 1% now of global emissions. We're one of the lowest of the whole set of G7. What we should be doing is saying, do you know what? The cost of this is so high, probably well over £1 trillion. They don't want it. So when you see polls, they say, yes, keen on that, but not going to pay another penny towards this. And I think we need to say, stop the rush, try and get this sorted so the public can actually agree and believe with where we are. Now, Labour will come to that fight because they're completely wedded to the whole rush to net zero, the 28 billion, which Rishi Sunak goes on about quite rightly, that Labour pledged to spend of taxpayers' money. That had to disappear, but it's only temporary. It'll come back if they get elected. So defining them, migration, we've got the flights to Rwanda. They've got to get that bill finished and through and those off.
How confident are you that you're going to see flights off to Rwanda in this term?
Well, I'm confident, but I'm not absolutely confident.
You don't sound that confident.
Well, there's one bit which is the European Convention of Human Rights, which there's a little window that could possibly do it. They might have made it tougher.
But I think actually I mean, is it going to be enough? I know that there's this theory that if you send flights to Rwanda, finally, if you send people away and you try and bring these boat numbers down, that's going to be the secret to some kind of electoral success for the Tories. They've got to do a lot more than that, haven't they?
But the main point is these things sometimes are quite visual. The flights going off to Rwanda is a sign, finally, that the government has gripped this and is beginning to turn the tide. There are lots of other routes in. As you've seen, a lot of... we've had a huge migration here. One of the big pressures on housing is the scale of the number of people coming in. That doesn't help. But that means, therefore, we've got to start getting those on sickness benefit. And when I did it, we had the lowest number of workless households. They've now ballooned since COVID. We've
9 million who could
really
work,
got to get that and back to work. Proper training. Kids have disappeared from school as a result of the ridiculous lockdowns. We've got to get this going, and we need to show that we're keen on that.
On migration, no doubt you noticed, as I did, that this figure of 315,000 per year seems to be baked in by the OBR when it comes to how legal migration should look over the coming years. 315,000 people coming into this country a year is too many people, isn't it?
The most positive thing anybody in politics and government can do is ignore the OBR.
Right.
They've been wrong
should
on...
that figure come down? Why are the government now using these figures?
Of course it should, because we've got so many people here domestically in the UK that should be seeking work, taking that work and learning, a lot of training. That needs to happen. So all of this is where we should be going. This cheap way of bringing people in just because you can't be bothered to train them because you have to.
Yes.
It's like drivers. I used to have this argument with the big haulage companies. So why are you bringing all these people in from Poland when there are loads of people with driver's license that would need only 2 weeks, I did it, HGV2, to train to be an HGV, then it's a very well-paid career, and they just didn't want to do the training side of it. So, you know, we need to stop looking for cheap short-term alternatives and start recognising the British public are worth investing in to get them back to work and trained.
But people like you are making all of these great points, which I'm sure our audience would wholeheartedly agree with. But the government isn't listening. I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? That Rishi Sunak is banging on about this 5-point plan. It's not working. They've come out with a budget that hasn't moved the dial at all. You've got this scandal over this Hester donation. You know, the Tories are now under pressure to give this 10 million back because of his comments about Diane Abbott. I mean, you can sympathise with the view that the Tories should give that £10 million back.
I can, but they probably spent it, so it's going to be quite difficult for them.
What about the
way I would say,
that's hanging in the
I don't understand why we want to give money back to somebody who's been so abusive and used race in an argument. Why would you give that back to him when that rewards him for having been stupid and appalling? So what I would say, if you've got any money to give back, I'd give it to charities and people that help with community cohesion and all the other stuff. That's the way to punish somebody who behaves really badly, not give the money back to him.
And what's your analysis of some of these reports about Penny Mordaunt in this morning's newspapers? I mean, the right is suggesting that they could back Penny Mordaunt. Could you back Penny Mordaunt?
I just look at this whole process and think to myself, we've got to stop turning inwards on ourselves and start trying to get behind the idea that we've got an election to fight. And the public wants to know that we're both united and we're very clear. Those points I said earlier on about how to get the Labour Party into an argument that you can then kill them over in terms of the way that you take the debate is really critical, and dynamic politics demands it. What dynamic politics does not demand is literally the sort of third leader in a short space of time that replaced Boris Johnson. And I was opposed to when we replaced Boris Johnson because as he had a man with many faults and had done all sorts of stuff, but nobody had faced the crises he had faced, and he still at that stage would have been an asset at the end of the day in communication.
Is he still an asset?
But Rishi is here, and we have to get behind him, I think, genuinely. Now, I'd take a lot of persuading. It's not a short-term process. You'd have to have a vote of confidence. Then on the back of the vote of confidence, you have to have a leadership election. The idea, you know, I'd be persuaded that you could get one person in short term. I doubt it. That will take you weeks.
But then we read reports today in the Sunday Times that even Rishi Sunak thinks he might not go the distance and that he might be out by June or July.
Well, the answer is we either decide that we want to get the election won or we just want to give up on it.
Isn't it a damage limitation exercise now, though? I mean, get the election won. Don't you mean not lose it too badly?
No, I mean, the only way you can do politics is to aim to win.
Yes.
Aim to resist, aim to stop, aim to halfway. It doesn't work. You've got to try and win that election. And I think sometimes I have to say to my colleagues, you spend more time discussing how to avoid defeat than you do actually talking about winning. When you're that negative, the public can see it. They think, well, what's the point of these people?
Yes.
All they want to do is surrender. I say to my colleagues, get on the front foot, get out into your constituencies and start really blasting this nonsense that Labour believes in, of net zero, the trans thing with safe spaces for women. All these things are really important.
Do you think you have a better chance of winning if you bring back Boris to campaign for the Tories?
I would love to see Boris come back and campaign because he's a very good campaigner. It's not to undermine any leadership. It's just he'd be a great campaigner. But is he an electoral asset in your seat? I mean, you're in a London seat. You know, it's a marginal seat. Well, more, I think, outside in that sense, we've got to work our own sense. In London, the big issue for us, in my seat, is things like ULEZ, which this present mayor, who I think is one of the weakest spineless mayors we've ever had, introduces this for the money, and nobody wants it in North London because the environment is clean up there. We don't need ULEZ. He pushed it on us. Nobody I've met on the doorstep wants this. They want to get rid of it, and the Conservative Party, the candidate, Susan Hall, is committed to getting rid of it literally as she can on day 1 or 2.
Is she making enough headway, do you think?
Well, it takes a little bit of time, really.
She hasn't got much time left, though.
No, she hasn't. But my main point is, I agree, she's got to be more out there. We've got to get behind her. But the reality is the issues are the key thing that will decide the mayoral election. I wouldn't say he's got an awful lot of character. So the reality is it's a campaign between ideas and what you will do. And London's fed up with the extra costs that he's imposed on them, the divisive nature of what he does in central London. And they want a mayor that actually says, let's get the economics of London right, because central London is very damaged post-lockdown, and he's imposed the congestion charge and the ULEZ charge for 7 days a week. People don't go to restaurants anymore and spend their money to the degree they did before in central London.
We've literally got a minute left, if that. Just have a very quick chat about Russia and China. Obviously, we've had Grant Shapps seemingly under threat, but I'm wondering, I know you have been hawkish on China. Do you still think the bigger threat is coming from China than Putin?
Yeah, I'm sanctioned by China because I raised the genocide of the Uyghur, and they hated that, so they sanctioned me and a few others. I take a view about China, which is China is very wealthy, and it sits at the heart of what I call this new axis of totalitarian states. So China, North Korea, Russia, Iran is very close to China, and all this stuff over Gaza was planned by Iran. Why we haven't prescribed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in London is, to me, an utter mystery. 2 banks shoveling money out to these extremists that exist in the UK. We should stop that straight away.
Sir Ian, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Up next, I'm going to be joined by Labour's Jonathan Ashworth, and then I'll be speaking to the Secretary of State for Transport, Mark Harper. Can things get any worse for the Tory party? Stay tuned. You won't want to miss either of those 2 interviews.
Want to be a winner?
You've won £18,000.
Oh, flipping heck. I don't know what to say.
Enter our massive spring giveaway with 3 big seasonal prizes to be won. There's £12,345 in tax-free cash to give your finances a spring boost. We'll also send you on a shopping spree with £500 worth of vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. You'll also get a garden gadget package. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Tubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
Get this right. We all know by now, don't we, that so many NHS workers are abused by people that they're trying to help. We'll all agree that that is pretty damn disgraceful. But what do we do about it? Because now some London hospitals are looking at whether or not they should be able to ban people that do this for a year from those hospital facilities. Is that the way forward? Daniel, do you like this? No abuse, no excuse. That is the campaign.
There's no other choice for most people. It's either the NHS or nothing. And if you're going to take that monopolistic power, then you need, I think, you have responsibilities towards people. You can't cut them off. So there are ways in which, of course, you can bring criminal charges against them. If they've committed a criminal offence, that's fine. They might even be locked up in jail. But what you can't do is cut off health services because you're the only supplier.
Well, yes, I think you can cut it off, and you should cut it off. London is very different from everywhere else, and it goes back to a conversation about immigration. The majority of nurses in London are either African or Filipino, and it harks back to their nature and their culture. When you're younger, your parents look after you. When you're older, you look after them. They don't go into homes. So there's a way that a threshold of tolerance they have that is above and beyond most people. So, because I found like when I was younger, most of the nurses were white. Now they work in hospitals in Ascot and Somerset. London is the war zone. I have seen horrific things happen to nurses, and they stay. They show up for work. There's a protection they are owed, beyond owed. And if you abuse something that's offered to you as a part of your citizenship, there should be a penalty for that. For the same reason,
you're obliged to use it. There's no offer involved in the NHS.
But it is but there is an offer because at the end of the day, like you figure out how to get money and go private. So just because you've created something that gives you no, it's easy. If it's
that's
easy,
an impossible solution.
They've created something that's kind and easy and beneficial to all, indeed. But it's a good thing for all. Do not abuse it. That simply.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by Labour's Shadow Paymaster General, Jonathan Ashworth, and Transport Secretary Mark Harper. I'll also be joined by the Liberal Democrats' Chief Whip, Wendy Chamberlain. But first, here's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Senior Tories have attempted to downplay claims of a Conservative plot to replace Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister with Penny Mordaunt. Reports in the Mail and the Telegraph say MPs on the right of the party would like Ms Mordaunt to lead them into the next election in an effort to avoid, quote, catastrophic losses in the polls. Former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg denounced the idea as madness. Dame Andrea Jenkins, who's publicly backed installing a new leader before the election, denied knowledge of plans to anoint Ms Mordaunt in a coronation. The move would mean a fourth leader of the party in just 5 years. The Ministry of Defence says Grant Shapps was forced to abandon a trip to southern Ukraine last week for security reasons. British intelligence warned of a credible missile threat from Russia, saying the Kremlin had got wind of his visit. That's according to the Sunday Times. Mr Shapps was due to travel to Odessa a day after a missile hit the city, while the Ukrainian president and the Greek prime minister were visiting. 5 people were killed in the explosions, according to Ukrainian authorities. Russians are casting their ballots on the final day of voting for the country's next president. Vladimir Putin, who's been in power since 1999, is expected to win another 6-year term with a landslide victory. The election comes just over 2 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The first 2 days of the vote saw dozens of incidents of vandalism at polling stations, with several people detained across Russia. Councils will have to consider whether residents support low-traffic neighbourhoods in their area before going ahead with the schemes. The draft guidance is due to come into force this summer. They're designed to encourage cycling and walking by limiting driving in side roads and include wider pavements and barriers to restrict vehicles. LTNs often use signs and bollards to prevent traffic being able to drive along a certain route. As well as local residents, businesses and emergency services will also need to approve of the move. And finally, a volcano in Iceland has erupted for a fourth time in just 3 months. Previous eruptions destroyed roads and forced a town to evacuate. If you're watching us on television right now, you'll be able to see fountains of molten rock soaring into the night sky from fissures in the ground. Authorities had warned for weeks that an eruption was imminent just south of Iceland's capital, Reykjavik. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Camilla.
Thanks, Tatiana. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by Labour's Shadow Paymaster General, Jonathan Ashworth, about a possible return for Diane Abbott. Then I'll be speaking to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, about the latest round of Tory leadership instability. A Liberal Democratic MP is finally joining us later on the programme, the party's chief whip, Wendy Chamberlain. Could an election pact with Labour be on the cards? And I'll also be speaking to an author and commentator called Rob Henderson, who's got a fascinating new book out about his impoverished childhood, which has got a very interesting take on the concept of white privilege. Now, I'm hoping that Jonathan Ashworth can hear me now. He's the Labour MP for Leicester South and the Shadow Paymaster General. Jonathan, lovely to see you this morning. I hope you're keeping dry for us.
I am trying to keep dry. It's very wet here, but I can hear you, and it's lovely to be on the show with you this morning.
Well, likewise. So let's talk about your general election betting then. It's not gone very well for you, has it? It's not going to be a May election, so you're going to put some money on a November election then?
Well, I think I'll put some money on a Tory leadership election, frankly. Isn't it absolutely chaos what is going on? And if you look at what's happened in the last 10 days, we've had the Rishi Sunak unveiling a £46 billion unfunded bombshell, a bombshell which threatens the state pension as we know it, because it severs the link between your national insurance contributions and the pension you get at the end. Just silver voices yesterday in the Daily Express warning that this could mean to a means-tested pension. We've got the Tory party being bankrolled by £10 million from a racist and refusing to give that money back. Tory MPs.
Why would you want to give the money back to a racist?
Talking about Rishi Sunak. Sorry?
Why would you want to give £10 million back to a racist?
Well, they shouldn't hold on to that money, but I just think this shows that Rishi Sunak is not acting in the national interest. It's reckless, it's irresponsible. He should name the day of a general election and stabilise matters. At the moment, he's more preoccupied with his own leadership and saving his own skin than governing in the national interest. And I think after 14 years, this is a pretty discredited government. He needs to name the date. I mean, but if he doesn't name the date soon, we could have a leadership election soon.
All right, well, perhaps. But at the same time, why haven't you put down proper, solid policies? I mean, you keep on telling the electorate to wait until you come up with your manifesto. There's been so much flip-flopping from Keir Starmer that people don't really know what Labour stands for. What does Labour stand for, Mr Ashworth?
Well, we stand for growing our economy, raising living standards, not just in one part of the country, but in every corner of the country.
How are you going to do that? More tax, more spend, or?
Well, I'll tell you one of the things we're going to do. We're going to help get people back to work. We'll start by fixing the National Health Service, where there are 7 million people on a waiting list. Many of your viewers will be waiting longer and longer for treatment, whether that's to see a GP or to get the operation for a hip operation or a knee operation or a hernia, perhaps. That's because the Tories have mismanaged the NHS for 14 years now. We're going to create more appointments in our NHS.
But how are you going to do that financially, Mr Ashworth? I'm trying to establish whether the Labour Party are going to have to put taxes up if they want to increase government spending. I assume you do want to increase government spending, first of all.
We do want to see an injection into the NHS because we need to get the NHS back on its feet, because your viewers
So how are you going to pay for that?
The best quality treatment. Well, we were going to pay for it by getting rid of a super wealthy tax break called the non-doms. The Tories have now adopted our idea. They've copied our idea, as you know.
They've shot your fox on that one, haven't they?
Well, they haven't shot a fox as such, but they've completely revealed that it's the Labour Party leading the battle of ideas, and that we're the party with a plan. And
yeah, but the trouble is now, you haven't got that money, have you now? Because you had said that you were going to do lots of different things by scrapping non-dom. You don't have that money. So how are you going to pay for all of the pledges that you're going to make? That's what I'm trying to work out.
Yeah, and it's a fair question. And Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, she is not casual with taxpayers' money. She knows people work hard and pay their taxes, and they want that money well spent. So we're responsible.
So you're not going to put taxes up?
We're going through the books, and we're going to tell you how we will fund those commitments. The Conservatives, in contrast, have made a £46 billion unfunded commitment, a bombshell, and they won't even tell you where the money is coming from. Well, I'll tell you where the money is coming from. It's probably coming from more tax on pensioners.
Okay.
It's probably coming from severing the link
but
between
hang on a
contribution
minute.
and the pension.
Rachel Reeves has said that she wouldn't reverse this NI cut. Your own Shadow Chancellor has said she wouldn't reverse this NI cut. So are you at odds with your own Shadow Chancellor?
No, there's two things going on here. Because we've long warned that the tax burden on working people is so high. I mean, Rishi Sunak, I think he increased tax 25 times, didn't he? People are really getting hammered out there. We've said where tax cuts on working people are sustainable and affordable, we support them. But what the Conservatives have said for the future is that they want to introduce a £46 billion unfunded bombshell. It severs the link between contribution and your state pension entitlement, and they will not tell you where that money is coming from. Is it borrowing, with all the pressure that puts on mortgages? Is it cuts to the NHS? Or is it a new payroll tax?
But my point here, Mr Ashworth, is...
Will pensioners have to pay it?
But this argument doesn't hold up, does it? Because Rachel Reeves has said she supports this bombshell that you're talking about. She supports the cut to NI.
No, we're talking at cross purposes, Camilla. There's been a national insurance change now. If that is sustainable and affordable, that will have our support. This is about the future. This is about the future.
Okay, so in the future,
for the next 5 years.
Okay, so in the future, are you going to put national insurance up then? Are you going to put tax up as well?
No. What we are talking about is the Tory plan. They are saying they want to introduce £46 billion worth of a commitment, and they cannot tell you where the money is coming from.
But you can't tell me where your spending commitments are going to come from. You can't tell me whether you're going to put tax up or down. We've got your Green Prosperity Pledge. How about we try and nail this down? What is the current status of the 28 billion Green Prosperity Pledge? What's happening to that?
We are not. As you know, we're not spending 28 billion. But
that was your own figure.
We are making you this promise. We will tell you how we will fund all of our commitments. The Tories won't even make you that promise. They will not even promise to tell you how they're going to fund.
I understand this whole, I ask you a question and then you ask me how the Tories are going to fund their promises. I'm going to ask Mark Harper that in just a minute. So you can leave that part of my job to me.
I will look out for it.
What I'm asking you, Jonathan Ashworth, is how you are going to fund your spending pledges.
He fails to answer.
OK, please do. I love it when you retweet my material. But my question to you is, how are Labour going to fund...
Camilla, as you know.
I know you do. How are you going to fund your spending pledges? Because the trouble is, you have committed a load of different policies to scrapping non-dom. But you don't have that money anymore. You've also been pledging a lot to the windfall tax. So how are you going to make up the shortfall that you thought you were going to have to get that non-dom money? There's a black hole in your plans here, isn't there?
On the non-dom issue, Rachel Reeves has said very clearly, we are going through the books line by line, and we will come out and we will publish how we are going to fund all of our plans. We'll account for every penny piece. Mark Harper cannot give you that commitment when he comes on your show in a few moments.
But you can't even tell me whether you're going to cut taxes or whether you're going to increase spending. You can't even tell me whether you think tax is going to come down or go up under Labour. You can't even tell me that right now.
Well, tax and spend are matters for our Shadow Chancellor. And, of course, we know that the Conservatives are hoping to have another budget before a general election. They're briefing that. and we will want to look at the books very carefully, because we are not irresponsible with the public finances. We are not casual with the public finances. We saw what happened with Liz Truss when you adopt a casual approach with the public finances. So I make no apologies for being prudent with the finances and wanting to go for everything, every single item, every penny piece of expenditure, line by line, because people work really hard.
Can we talk about Diane Abbott?
And they want a government that's going to be spending their money carefully.
Can we talk about Diane Abbott? Is it going to be prudent to have Diane Abbott back in the Labour Party? I know Angela Rayner is calling for it. Keir Starmer isn't. So it seems there's a bit of a... that there are odds, the Labour leader and his deputy, on this issue. Where do you stand on it?
Well, there is an independent process. I'm not going to second-guess that independent process because it is...
What do you think, though? What's your instinct? You've been in politics for a long time.
I mean, I have been in politics for a long time, despite my youthful looks, and I also know that these processes, when they are independent, it is not appropriate for them to be pressured by politicians. And that's
well,
not
lots
just
of people think she shouldn't be allowed back in the party because she's made what some think are racist remarks about Jewish people. So what's your instinct on it, John? You've been around the block a long time. Do you think that Diane Abbott should have the Labour whip restored, yes or no? It's a really simple question.
Well, it's quite right. Well, it's quite right that she had the whip suspended and a process began, and that process needs to take its course. And I'm not going to second-guess or pressure that process because it's an independent process, because that would not be fair.
Why is this taking so long? I mean, it's so straightforward. Should she be in the Labour Party or shouldn't she?
You're going to keep asking me the same question, and I'm going to keep saying to you, if it's an independent process,
if you don't answer the question, I can only assume you don't have an answer for it. But I don't think I'm asking you anything complicated here. Do you think Diane Abbott is a woman?
You know what you're
she's
doing.
a woman you've worked with for
Camilla.
years. Should she be back in the party?
Camilla,
what's your personal opinion?
You do know what you're... You do know what you're asking me. I'm telling you it's an independent process, but you keep asking it me because you know that you'll get a Twitter thing saying, no, you couldn't answer the question. But the reality is it's an independent process, and it has to be, that's because it's independent. It's nothing to do with me. And if it's independent, you shouldn't try to pressurise it from outside. That's the point of it being an independent process.
All right. Well, how about an independent process into Angela Rayner's second home? Would you advocate that? We've still got questions to answer about whether she's paid an inadequate amount of capital gains tax. So should we have an independent inquiry into that, and then we might get some answers?
There's no need to say the word independence with a hint of sarcasm.
No, I love an independent inquiry.
It's important that these processes take their course. On Angela Rayner, as I understand it, I think she said, I don't know if you were she did an event with the press on Thursday. I wasn't there, but I read the comments that she said she'd taken expert advice and the matter, she doesn't need to pay anything and it's all resolved.
It's not resolved, though, is it?
I understand she said.
But it's not resolved because there are still reports clamouring for her to explain herself and a seemingly unexplained potential capital gains tax bill. So it's far from resolved. That's why she keeps on being asked to answer questions about it. Why doesn't she just answer the questions and then the matter might be resolved?
Well, she did an event with the press lobby on Thursday. I don't know if you went to it, where she did answer questions on this and said that she's taken advice and the issue is resolved.
All right. Final question on this VAT on private school fees. I'm surprised that somebody like you, and I know you very well, would be supporting this policy, which seems to me to smack of sort of Corbynista politics of envy nonsense. Are you really seriously backing this, even though it could displace, as far as the Independent Schools Council is concerned, 40,000 private school pupils? You want to take these pupils out of their schools, away from their friends, and accommodate them where in the state sector exactly?
Well, as you know, the public finances are a mess, thanks to the 14 years of the Conservatives. A mess particularly because of what the Conservatives did with the Liz Truss budget, 18 months or so.
Yeah, we're talking about private school VAT, though.
I know, but we're going to have to make some tough decisions. We're going to have to make some tough decisions, and one of those tough decisions is to levy that VAT on the private schools fees and use the money to fund an expansion of mental health provision, because we do know there's a huge problem.
Well, you're going to have to use the money to expand classrooms, aren't you? Because you're going to have 40,000 pupils at loose, possibly come September, if their parents preemptively are going to take them out because they think they can't afford the fees. So where are you going to put these kids, in temporary classrooms?
I'm not sure about that. I don't agree with that. I think that is exaggerated, frankly. I don't think we'll see that mass exodus from private schools. I do think, though, we do have to make some tough decisions, and that money will fund an expansion of mental health provision in state schools for the majority of children.
All right, Jonathan Ashworth, thank you very much indeed for braving the weather to speak to us this morning. It's been great to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, with yet more talk of a rival bid for the Tory leadership. Could Rishi Sunak be replaced before the general election? Stay tuned.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
I've got an idea. I think that all 30-year-olds should be given £10,000 from the banks of baby boomers. We've got a situation in this country now where millennials are the first generation in modern times expecting to be poorer than their parents. We, as 30-year-olds like me, are half as likely to own a house as people my age 30 years ago. In fact, the cost of a home in Britain, compared to average incomes, has as big a gap today as it did, wait for it, in the 1860s. It is a Dickensian situation.
Now, I'm sorry about the housing crisis for your generation.
You're not, though, are you?
No,
because you're profiting from it.
I'm profiting from it. Don't be ridiculous.
The house prices now, compared to that period.
If this is the case, Benjamin,
have incomes gone up that fast?
To penalise and punish the elderly when they have worked all their lives to put into the system and say it's your fault, whingy, whiny, we're going to be envious.
We're being punished.
No, well, by the politics, so be the change you want to see in the world.
Taxes, I am actually, and I'm about to tell you about the change I want to see in the world.
Are you good? As long as it's not whining about it.
I'm going to stop whining about it, but we are being taken advantage of at the moment to profit, to help the old. Most of taxpayers' money is spent in two departments, the NHS, so the Health Department, and the Department for Work and Pensions. Those departments disproportionately serve the older population. Now, I've got no issue with that, but let's not pretend that it is not young working people that is paying for the public services for old people. So actually, we are having it hard, and I just look at the future, and we see a future of perpetually higher taxes to pay for this increasing ageing population, a shrinking labour force, and you're here saying we've got nothing to worry about.
The young stop voting for mass immigration parties. The young stop voting for parties that don't build houses.
Immigrants actually pay taxes, pensioners don't.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Brand new Sundays from 6 p.m. The Neil Oliver Show.
It's absolutely vital that people are given the opportunity to take part in the debate, to say the things that matter to them, to be challenged. A country is only really a shared dream. As long as enough people have a shared idea of what it is, then that country exists. What GB News does is give voices somewhere they can be heard.
The Neil Oliver Show, Sundays from 6 p.m. on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, I hope joins me now. He's also the Conservative MP for the Forest of Dean. Mr Harper, I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much indeed for your... Morning. Thank you for your time this morning. Can I have your reaction, first of all, to this polling in the Mail on Sunday, basically predicting electoral calamity, a near extinction event for the Conservatives? Rishi Sunak's plan isn't working, is it, Mr Harper?
Well, look, I haven't seen the specifics of that polling, but look, the plan we've got is working. The Prime Minister set out a number of commitments. The first one was to drive down the level of inflation. We have absolutely done that, and it's now forecast to fall even further as we get the next few months. And the other commitment was on stopping the boats. And in fact, tomorrow in Parliament, Conservative MPs will have the opportunity to vote down all of the amendments passed in the House of Lords by Labour peers attempting to weaken that legislation, and we'll have the opportunity to make sure we can strengthen it again and give us the ability to get those flights off to Rwanda to break the back of the organised crime groups trafficking people over the channel.
When will those flights take off? What's your prediction, Mr Harper?
Well, look, we've got the legislation still to get through Parliament. We're at the tail end of that, so I hope that will be on the statute book very soon.
Approximate
the Home Office
time frame.
has been working very hard on... Well, the Home Office is working very hard on making sure we can act as soon as the legislation's there. So I would hope we'd be able to get that those flights off the ground as soon as possible. I'm not going to pick an arbitrary date, but look, we've made a lot of progress already. We've reduced the number of people crossing the Channel by a third at a time when other European countries have seen a rapid rise. So we're absolutely delivering on that commitment. I think the public wants us to focus on delivering on commitments, not focusing on speculation in newspapers.
But you say that, but none of this is changing the situation for the Conservatives being so far behind Labour. None of this is moving the dial, as we say in the trade. We've now got talk in the newspapers about a leadership change again, such as the lack of confidence in Rishi Sunak being able to win the next general election, that there's now talk of Penny Mordaunt being brought in as yet another Tory leader.
Well, look, I'm concentrating on doing my job and focusing on making the right decisions for the country. That's also what the Prime Minister is doing, not focusing on stories in the newspapers. He's making the right long-term decisions for the country. The plan is delivering those results, and as we get through this year, he said at the beginning of this year it was his working assumption the election will be the second half of the year. I'm confident the public will see that the economy is moving in the right direction, inflation is falling, they're getting real terms pay rises. We've been able to cut taxes in both the budget and the autumn statement. That delivers a £900 tax cut for ordinary working people on an average income, and I think people will recognise that and that we'll get the credit. You don't change these opinion polls overnight. It does take time for that to work through, but I think we've got time to do that. And then the election, of course, is a choice between a party like us that's got a plan that's working and a Labour Party that hasn't got a plan that would take us back to square one. And I think in that choice, I think the public will back us.
If Tory MPs don't have confidence in Rishi Sunak, you can't blame the public if they don't have confidence in the Prime Minister either. I mean, why are so many of these Conservatives so-called shy Conservatives? Why have I had Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, the former party leader, in the studio earlier talking about the fact that half of the electorate is undecided? The Conservatives hasn't done enough to convince them to vote for them. You haven't done enough to convince people to vote for you, Mr Harper. That's the problem. That's why you're also going to get annihilated in the May local elections, right?
Look, it's perfectly true that there is a record number of people at the moment who are undecided and don't know who they're going to vote for. So that is the opportunity for us. You're absolutely right. That group of voters who haven't yet decided what they're going to do, many of whom will have voted for us in 2019, we've got to show them by the time of the election two things. We've got to show them that we've got a plan, the plan is working and it's delivering for them, and I think we can see that it is on inflation and on taxes. We've also then got to show them that the Labour Party doesn't have a plan and will be a big risk. For example, we know the Labour Party wants to spend £28 billion on their green plan. They've hidden the price tag now, but we don't know how to pay for it. That would mean taxes going up.
To be fair, Jonathan Ashworth has just been on accusing you of having a £46 billion black hole in your own finances because of the pledge you're making over the next 5 years on national insurance cuts. So how are you going to fund those?
Well, look, that's nonsense. Well, look, that's nonsense. We've made it quite clear that we have an ambition to stop the double taxation of work, but we already have demonstrated, but we're only going to deliver that when the public finances allow, and we've just demonstrated both at the budget and at the autumn statement that we've been able to take 4% off of national insurance contributions. That's a third reduction, and we did that at the same time as we were investing in public services, increasing people's pensions, and investing extra money into the National Health Service. So we can do all of these things because we've made the right long-term decisions. So I think, frankly, Labour's line is just a load of scaremongering. It also shows, by the way, that they don't understand how the tax system works.
Well, having said that, the National Grid isn't scaremongering, is it, Mr Harper, when it says it's going to cost £60 billion at a Conservative estimate to decarbonise by 2035? So again, I had Ian Duncan-Smith in the studio earlier talking about the cost of the government's net zero pledges. I mean, the costs of this £60 billion at a bare minimum, it's going to cost the general public billions of pounds, isn't it?
Well, look, it's very important that we deliver on our climate change obligations. People can see that the climate is changing.
We are delivering on them, aren't we? I mean, we're delivering on them. We found out this week Britain's carbon emissions have fallen to their lowest level since 1879, yet it's not making any difference whatsoever to the world's temperature. Why are you sticking to this net zero target when we're doing so well on carbon emissions already?
Well, look, it is important that we reduce our carbon emissions for several reasons. Firstly, for the climate, because, by the way, the change in the climate also puts a huge cost on the public sector. For example, my area of transport, we're having to spend a significant amount of money to make both the rail network and the road network more resilient to the extreme weather events we're getting. That's a cost on the taxpayer, which we need to deal with. But secondly, it's also about making sure that we're no longer dependent on carbon sources of energy to stop us being dependent, for example, on having to buy fuel from countries like Russia, who use that to fuel their war machine. Actually, having more carbon-friendly sources of energy means we're more resilient, more protected from energy price hikes like the one we've seen over the last couple of years. So I think it's good for consumers. Yes, we do have to invest money in the National Grid, but I think that can be afforded in the usual way. The National Grid invests a lot of money in making sure it's resilient, and I think that's in the interest of consumers to make us much more independent, energy independent.
Obviously, there's this move to get people to drive electric vehicles. Currently, as it stands, Mr Harper, you're Transport Secretary, so you should know the answer to this. How many electric vehicle charging points are there in the UK?
So we've just driven up, well, it depends what you mean by charging points. Most people with an electric vehicle actually charge their vehicle at home.
Yes.
We're obviously going to need increasing numbers of charging points. We're going to need an increasing number of charging points publicly. We drove up the number of charging points in the last year by 43%. The charge point industry has about £6 billion worth of capital available to roll that over the next few years. So we're very confident that as the number of electric vehicles increases, and there are over 1 million on the roads already, there will be charge points both at motorway service areas and in local communities, as well as people charging home. Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know the precise number, but it increased by 43% last year. Well, I don't know, because it increased by 43% last year.
I know, but you know how many electric vehicles are on the road, so there's 1 million electric vehicles. Many people are saying they're struggling to find charging points. So how many are there and how many should there be?
Well, the point about charging points is the number grew by 43% last year. It's increasing every day of the week. It's increasing every day of the week. And there are going to be increasing numbers at motorway service. I don't know the precise number, Camilla. I just said that. It increased by 43% last year. Most people charge at home, and we're going to make sure there are... Well, there are going to be an increasing number as we see an increased number of cars on the roads. Most people charge at home, and that will continue to be the case.
But how many do you think we need to sustain this? How many do you think we need to have? What number would you put on it? You're the Transport Secretary.
Well, it depends on the mix that you have. So, for example, we're seeing an increasing number of fast chargers available. That means you don't need as many of those as you do with slower chargers. The technology is developing all of the time. We've set out rules so that there'll be competitive charging available at motorway service areas, so people will have a choice of charge point operators. We're being clear about transparency on pricing, and the number of charge points is increasing every day. But as I said, most people charge at home, but we're making sure there will be charge points available publicly and at motorway service areas, so people have the confidence they can charge their vehicles wherever they go.
All right, Mark Harper, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
Thank you very much, Camilla.
Thank you, thank you. Next, I'm going to be joined by a Liberal Democrat. At last, we don't often see them on the show, but Wendy Chamberlain, who's the party's chief whip, is going to be joining us from the Lib Dem Spring Conference in just a moment.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Should we put tobacco-style warnings on ultra-processed foods? Boris Johnson is calling on the government to do this. In his Daily Mail column, the former Prime Minister says that people don't know what they're feeding their families and there's too many extra ingredients. That's why I'm asking, should we put tobacco-style warnings on ultra-processed food? Well, joining me now to discuss, Steve Miller, former presenter of Fat Families, Helena Davidson, campaigner and policy expert at the Vegan Society. Right, so I'm going to start with you. Steve Miller, what do you think?
Oh, I'm applauding Boris today. Good on you, mate. And the reason for that is we know that the research on the warnings on cigarettes, I should say, when those warnings were visual, they worked very well. The second reason on a practical level is that we need to stop looking and listening before we start, grazing and putting things in the trolley. And the third thing is that these kind of signs, or these warnings, I should say, are kind of hypnotic. They trigger the emotion. So they're much more likely to get people to think and maybe resist.
Yeah, so at the Vegan Society, we're broadly in favour of increasing consumer knowledge when it comes to the nutritional value of people's food. But I think it's important to mention that ultra-processed food isn't an issue that's exclusive to vegans. And whilst most meat alternatives will fall into the ultra-processed food category, it largely depends on how we're going to look at how UPFs are going to be assessed, because vegan alternatives that fall under ultra-processed foods, they're actually on average healthier than meat products or ultra-processed foods that contain animal products. Really? So I think it depends on how we look at it. We might have to take a closer look at the nutritional profile of individual foods rather than the level of processing.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. I'm joined now by Wendy Chamberlain, the Liberal Democrat MP for North East Fife and the Lib Dem's chief whip and spokesperson for work and pensions. She's at the Spring Conference, which I believe is in York. Tell us about the Spring Conference, Wendy. What's going to be the main announcement there from the Lib Dems?
Well, Ed Davey is appearing this afternoon to give his keynote speech, and he's talking specifically about the NHS and social care, which, as you'll know from viewers, and certainly what I hear on the doorsteps, is a key concern for voters as we approach the general election.
Is more spending for the NHS and indeed a social care plan one of the Lib Dem priorities, do you think, come this next general election?
Well, we certainly want to see more spending in the NHS, but what we want to see is a real focus on social care. And indeed, what Ed Davey is calling for is some cross-party work on that, because regardless of the colour of the government that comes into power after the next election, social care is increasingly becoming a crisis for the NHS. I've done a lot of work, Camilla, on unpaid carers, and the whole system would fall down without them. I passed a private member's bill last session on that. So we need to really start focusing on this as an issue, because people don't think about it until it starts to affect them.
When you talk about cross-party collaboration there, Wendy, do you think that it's too political? Do you think that the NHS and indeed the issue of social care should be taken out of politics altogether?
Well, I think there's no doubt that our politics has become increasingly divisive. I was elected in 2019, and there's no doubt that since Brexit it has become more difficult to find consensus. And in some ways, Westminster is set up to produce conflict. But on some of these key issues, I think people expect politicians to be the grown-ups in the room and really tackle some of the challenges. Now, it's over to Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak whether they take up that offer to discuss from Ed. But I certainly know that he's coming to the table genuinely on that, because it's something that he cares very passionately about.
How are the Liberal Democrats doing at the moment? I mean, you could argue that you're perhaps getting squeezed out of the political debate a bit, not only because of the arguments that are going on between the Tories and Labour, as is ever the case as the two main parties, but also because of reform bringing up the rear.
Well, I'm obviously a Scottish MP, Camilla, so I'll be looking to the SNP as well. But in terms of reform, yes, we're seeing an increase in support for them in the polls. But as we found out painfully in 2019, it's not about the number of votes you get. We increased our vote share by a number of percent and over 1 million votes in 2019, but delivered 11 MPs. We're really focused on delivering the highest number of MPs that we can. And I think the challenge for reform is, can they actually deliver any MPs? I think they're going to cause real difficulty for the Conservatives, but I don't think they're actually going to deliver any MPs at the end of the day. That's what first past the post as a system does.
Indeed. Although, would you support scrapping first past the post? I suppose the Liberal Democrats might find agreement with Nigel Farage on that one issue, Wendy.
Yeah, absolutely. Make Votes Matter has a good systems agreement on electoral reform, which both Reform and the Liberal Democrats are signed up to. If you want to see better consensus across politics, you need to make politicians work together, and electoral reform would help you to do that.
I noted yesterday that the Reform Party announced a sort of alliance with some partners in Northern Ireland, and inevitably the question is going to come as to whether the Liberal Democrats, if you do manage, as you've there pledged, to increase your vote share, might be in a position to prop up a Starmer government. Is a deal with Labour something that you'd like to consider?
I mean, Camilla, I'm not going to talk about what comes afterwards. I'm going to talk about being focused on being the third party back at Westminster and delivering as many Liberal Democrat MPs as possible. From a Northern Ireland perspective, Alliance already are our sister party, so we work closely with Stephen Farry in the House of Commons now.
Fair enough. Final question for you, Wendy. Now, I know you've been on my show before, and I'm delighted to have you as ever. Why won't Sir Ed Davey come on GB News? Is he missing a trick here, do you think?
Well, I think we always will take the opportunities to appear where we can. I think we'll just need to keep asking the press team, but I'm delighted to be here. I was here in the autumn and I'm back here again.
All right. Well, look, good luck at the Lib Dem Spring Conference in York today, and thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Next up, I'm going to be speaking to my fellow GB News host, Michael Portillo, and then Rob Henderson, who will join me to chat about his new book, Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family and social caste. Don't go anywhere.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So today has started quite cloudy and damp for some of us, but that will gradually be turning brighter as we head through the afternoon. The area of rain that we can see across much of England and Wales eventually pushes its way eastwards through the latter half of the morning, with some brighter spells developing behind. However, for Northern Ireland and for Scotland, it has been a bit of a drier and brighter start this morning. Plenty of sunshine around here, and through the afternoon, that sunshine developing more widely across England and Wales. We will see some some showers bubbling up and they could be heavy in places, but another really mild day, 16 or 17 degrees in the south. Through Sunday evening, any of those showers across much of England, Northern Ireland and into Scotland will gradually start to ease overnight, so turning a little drier for most of us by the end of Sunday. But another band of rain then pushes in from the west, spreading its way eastwards through the early hours of Monday morning. Away from this area of rain, though, it will be a cloud-free night, so under those clear skies, temperatures dropping down into the single figures, perhaps as low as 2 or 3 in some rural spots. Into the start of Monday, that band of rain pushes its way eastwards. It gradually starts to ease through the early hours of the morning, leaving quite a dry and bright start for most of us. Plenty of sunshine through the first part of the day. But for Northern Ireland, cloud does start to build, so turning much greyer as we head through the afternoon, with further outbreaks of rain pushing in from the west through Monday afternoon. But staying dry elsewhere, and with temperatures around 15 or 16 degrees, it'll be feeling very pleasant in that sunshine.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Michael Portillo is up at 11 a.m. just after this show, so please stay tuned for that. Michael, tell us what's coming up on your show.
Good morning, Camilla. Well, the Sunday papers tell us that the Prime Minister's authority is ebbing away, and I want to ask my panel whether any event or development could possibly make things better for the Conservatives. We'll also be looking at the elections in Russia, and the question there is really whether the opposition can do anything at all to challenge the legitimacy of these sham elections. Turning to the arts, we're thinking about the Rex Whistler mural in the Tate, Britain, which was closed down a few years ago because it was regarded by some people as being racist. It's now reopening, but alongside it, there is going to be another display, which is basically a video discussing racism. Is that the way forward for works of art that are now regarded as controversial? At Burghley House, which is the house of the Cecil family, the head of a woman was found by a mechanical digger. I'm pleased to say that it's 1,800 years old and it's made of stone. It is, in fact, Roman, but it was 300 yards from the house, so we're going to look into the mystery of a Roman head found at Burghley House. And it is coming up to the equinox, and in Iran, it is the custom to celebrate the end of the winter and the coming of the light and the warmth, and we're going to be celebrating with masses of Iranian food.
Sounds absolutely intriguing. Thank you very much, Michael. We look forward to that at 11 o'clock. In just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Rob Henderson, who will discuss his new book and tell me why he invented the term luxury beliefs. But first, here's a quick weather update.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It is a beautiful start to the weekend out there for many of us, but not for all. It's already turning cloudy in the west, and there will be spells of rain and showers spreading across the country throughout the day. Now, Scotland, northern and eastern England keep the bright skies into the afternoon, but elsewhere we have got those showers and the thickening cloud. The rain most persistent across Northern Ireland. That persistent rain reaching parts of western Scotland by the middle of the afternoon and certainly turning cloudy in many places. As a result, and after a fresh start to the day, it's not going to be as mild as it has been recently in the south, but it will be a touch milder across northern Scotland, feeling more pleasant with lighter winds and some bright spells. Nevertheless, overnight, those spells of rain crossed the country, heavy and persistent for a time, particularly across western hills. And by dawn, really it's a showery picture with a lot of cloud in the sky and an increased breeze as well. So as a result, a frost-free start tomorrow. Temperatures of 9 or 10 Celsius first thing, but it will be a gloomy start with a lot of low cloud covering hills and coasts. And we're going to see those outbreaks of rain steadily push eastwards. By the afternoon, the clouds do lift and break up, and as a result, we'll see some brighter interludes, but we'll also see some heavy showers developing. Just about anywhere could see a hefty downpour, but Western Scotland and Northern Ireland seeing more persistent rain at times.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, commentator and author Rob Henderson joins me now to discuss his new book, Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family and social class. Lovely to see you this morning, Rob. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning, Camilla.
It's a fascinating book, this, because I mean, your life story so far has been extraordinary, really. You go from foster care to foster care, you living in desperate poverty, really, a huge amount of adversity you have to overcome. And yet, regardless of all of the challenges that life throws at you, you end up at Yale University in the US. Mm-hmm. How on earth did that happen? What do you put it down to?
There were a variety of different factors, but one was, I got out of the milieu I was in as soon as I could and enlisted in the U.S. Air Force when I was 17. So as soon as I graduated high school, I had to have my adoptive mother sign a permission slip because I was still underage. She'd allowed me to go off to the Air Force, and then from there I turned my life around and managed to get into Yale of all places, and then obtained a PhD at Cambridge. And there were a variety of different forces, but that was really the key, that decision to put myself in an environment where I could learn discipline and motivation and leadership and all of those things.
I mean, lots of people often look to the military, and people sometimes say, bring back national service. It might be a way of kind of getting Gen Z, back into the spirit of working for a living and trying hard and being aspirational. I mean, do you agree with that? The military's not for everyone, I guess.
I mean, I think the national service might work in certain contexts, like in Israel or South Korea, when there are serious national security threats. In the U.S. context or the UK context, I'm not entirely convinced, simply because these, completely different geopolitically in terms of defense. It doesn't have to be the military. I am thinking that, beyond the military, there could be other forms of national service, the Peace Corps, something along those lines of, just trying to inspire young people to broaden their horizons and learn some life skills and sort of help them bridge that transition into adulthood. There may be something there. It doesn't necessarily have to be the military.
Was there a sense, though, and I'm always intrigued by this when I hear about people's really challenging sort of life stories, that Rob Henderson, Rob as an individual, was always going to triumph, that you had something in you that meant that you were going to seize the very few opportunities that you were given? I mean, is this a case of sort of personality? Is it a case of circumstance? What do you put it down to?
I mean, both of those things are always a factor, sort of your innate intrinsic characteristics and the forces around you and external context. But a lot of it, those two things are important. There's an element of luck as well. I was behaving, extremely recklessly. In the book, I write about my teenage years. I was doing drugs. I was drinking and driving a lot. I was getting into fights, vandalizing buildings, kind of the things that wayward young kids do when they don't have a lot of supervision or oversight and live in fatherless homes and so on. But I think that part of it was just a bit of self-reflection, a little bit of mentorship from some of the teachers and people around me. That helped. And that was one reason why I actually joined the military. Actually, there was a male teacher who suggested it, and then one of my friend's fathers. So in the book, I write about how I actually moved out of my adoptive parents' house when I was 16, moved in with my friend and his brother and his father for reasons I explain. And his father had also been in the Air Force. And so, there were these sort of male older figures in my life. And I think having some mentorship and some sort of, people who can guide your life decisions, that can help as well.
Well, can we talk about kind of father figures? Because these days it's difficult to sort of talk about this issue, the issue of fatherlessness, without being criticised, without people saying, oh, you're just trying to stigmatise single-parent families. But at the same time, it shines throughout this book that if you didn't have these male role models along the way, you might not be where you are today.
Yeah, I think it's a real shame that we can't speak about this issue, simply because, the issue around fatherless homes is primarily concentrated, not entirely, but mostly concentrated in low-income communities, places where there's a lot of sort of disrepair and poverty. And look, one of the #1 predictors of social mobility in the US and the UK is coming from a two-parent family. The only really sort of bright spot in my early life was, funny enough, it wasn't having a father in the home, it was just having two parents. I explain in the book, my adoptive mother was temporarily in a relationship with a woman, and they were together and they were committed to one another, and they helped to raise me and my adoptive sister, and that was really important for me. And there were these kind of male role models around, and it's important, I think, even though I didn't have a father. I mentioned, these other people in my life that really did help to sort of contribute and, sort of tweak some of my intuitions about what a good life should be.
Can you tell me about you coining the phrase luxury beliefs? Because I think it's really interesting, this idea that, say, your average university-educated, I don't know, Just Stop Oil protester obviously lives this life of luxury, but is calling for policies that actually make the poor poorer. Just tell us about how you came up with that phrase and what it really means.
Well, so luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while inflicting costs on the lower classes, and a core feature of a luxury belief is that the believer is sheltered from the consequences of his or her belief. And this idea came to me when I arrived at Yale as an undergraduate. So I was 25 years old by this point. I'd spent my early life in foster homes and different kinds of family arrangements, left for the military, and then set foot on campus in this sort of rarefied elite university as a slightly older person compared to a lot of my peers. And I would just listen to the students, the undergrads, grad students, professors, administrators, people who had graduated from these kinds of universities. I worked at Stanford, and I just sort of spent the last few years sort of immersed in the elite university environment. And I would hear these newfangled beliefs about, defunding the police, or denigrating the importance of family, or promoting addictive technologies, and often at the expense of people who are sort of lower down the socioeconomic ladder. I mean, the defund the police one is a very easy way to understand this. But yeah, the Just Stop Oil, or blocking traffic for people who are on their way to their 9-to-5 jobs. They can't clock into work. I
mean, you make the point about defunding the police. I mean, that's all well and good if you're saying that as a Yale student who probably doesn't encounter much crime at all in their lives. But if you're in a lower socioeconomic group and you're constantly having your house broken into, or drug dealers out on the street outside, the idea of defunding the police is actually really unpopular.
Yeah, well, you can see this. I mean, I cite statistics in the book. There were representative survey data collected in the U.S., and when you break down the results by income group, the highest income Americans were the most supportive of defund the police. College-educated people were more likely to support defunding the police than less educated people. And as a result, violent crime spiked, homicide rates increased, and those victims were primarily people who were poor, marginalized, dispossessed from these communities. And there's never been sort of a reconciliation, an apology, and we've just sort of moved on and attempted to pretend like that actually never happened.
And also you've got a theory around the phrase white privilege, or at least its widespread use in campuses.
Well, I find that oftentimes the people who are the most enthusiastic about the white privilege idea, or who like to talk about their own privilege, are sort of white, upper middle class college graduates of elite universities. And it's interesting because ostensibly it's about them expressing feelings of guilt or remorse, but oftentimes what happens is they sort of elevate their own status in the eyes of their peers, because then the people around them, other elite university graduates, say, oh yes, this person gets it, this person understands that they have all this privilege, and then they end up elevating their reputation and their esteem in the eyes of others. But when white privilege policies are implemented, it's not going to be elite university graduates that are harmed, it's going to be working class white people,
Yes.
poor white people who are attempting to achieve a bit of success in their own lives and achieve some upward mobility. They're the ones who are going to be blocked by policies, attempting to inhibit this bizarre idea of white privilege.
Well, it's all in this new book, Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family and social class. Robbie, it's a great, great book, and we do recommend people to have a read because it challenges some of the, I would say, virtual signalling that we've witnessed in the past 10 years. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. Lovely to see you. Thank you to
Camilla.
Rob and, of course, all of my guests today. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30 as usual on Sunday, but Michael Portillo's up next and he's got a great show planned for you.
We've got cash, treats and a spring shopping spree to be won in a great British giveaway. You could win an amazing £12,345 in tax-free cash. Plus, there's a further £500 of shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. We'll also give you a gadget package to use in your garden this spring. That includes a games console, a pizza oven and a portable smart speaker, so you can listen to GB News on the go. For another chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or